Welcome, everyone, to our panel, No Going Back, AI Redefines SecOps for Security Service Providers. My name's Chris Luft. I'm co-founder and CCO of LimaCharlie, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this discussion with an incredible group of practitioners and leaders who live at the intersection of security operations and cutting-edge technology. Before we begin, I want to quickly introduce our panel. First, we have Eric Capuano, co-founder of the Digital Defense Institute and seasoned cybersecurity practitioner focused on incident response, threat hunting, and security operations. Eric brings decades of real-world experience training defenders and building resilient security programs. Next up, Maxime Lamoth-Broussard, founder and CEO of LimaCharlie, a platform architected from day one for API-first automation and now driving the next era of AI-driven security operations. Followed by Josh Neal, co-founder and CTO of Alpha Level, where he leads innovation and precision threat detection using machine learning and modern detection. We're also joined by Chris Merritt, the founder of CrowdStrike Overwatch and former AF CERT leader, currently serving as an advisor to early-stage companies and bringing strategic insight to product and marketing decisions. And last but not least, Daniel Lees, senior staff cloud security architect at Google and advisor to several early-stage technology companies. Thank you all so much for being with us today. I'm excited about this conversation where we're going to explore how AI is reshaping SecOps from automation to the economics of running security at scale. Let's get started. AI is everywhere in security right now. Most vendors talk about AI assistance, but not many talk about AI operating full security workflows. I want each of you to think of a specific security workflow that was manual drudgery like 18 months ago, which isn't anymore. What is it, and what does AI do with it today? Eric, let's start with you.
Yeah, so it's kind of fascinating. I think AI means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And it's definitely no clearer even in our narrow echo chamber of security, right? Because there's so many hot takes on it. There's a lot of skepticism around it. And there's definitely a lot of vendor fluff and smoke and mirrors, sadly. But I will say that it's also becoming, I think, undeniable the way that it's reshaping our workflows, the way that it's pushing our efficiency and our effectiveness. I mean, anyone that's not able to see kind of the inevitability that this is going to change the way we do security operations, threat hunting, instant response. I mean, it's here, right? It's here. And so as a practitioner, but also as an entrepreneur, I get to appreciate it from both aspects. As an entrepreneur, one of my favorite aspects of this is the efficiency gains, right? Because efficiency converts into profit margin, right? There's several different workflows that have just been revolutionized for me personally, but I'll give two that are they're force multipliers. So one of the most tedious things in security operations is detection engineering, right? Because it's very manual, very labor intensive. You're doing a lot of research, you're doing a lot of testing, because you can't just send a new detection into a production pipeline without worrying about what the downstream consequences might be. And so that process would take a human or a human team, it could be many hours, in most cases days, in order to get a rule from concept to production. Well, it turns out that whole workflow is actually very well understood. It's just slow and labor intensive. So as you start to leverage the concepts of LLM, but also the concepts of machine learning, right? You can, these two things I don't think are mutually exclusive. You can shim one with the other to say, okay, I've got this generally trained model that's not going to be phenomenal at crafting detections. But it turns out if I shim it, not only with reference data, examples, and so on and so forth, but then also provide it tools to be able to test its theories and assumptions, right? And then have it go into an iteration loop. You're not done until all of these conditions are met. Suddenly, the thing that took the human 16 hours takes the coding agent 6 minutes. And now you're producing detection content at speed that was never thought to be possible without the consequences of, oh no, hundreds of untested rules just went into the pipeline, right? So that was one really exciting workflow that has revolutionized, completely unrecognizable to me now. But another one, and this is a bit more generic, but a bit more wide-reaching, but full end-to-end investigative workflows. And using the same concepts I just described, right? Again, I'm not going to set loose a generally trained model on a very complex, very nuanced investigation into a BEC attack or something. However, shimmed with dozens of other investigations, some that went really well, some that did not go so well, and then having the model sort of iterate and iterate and iterate to kind of understand which patterns were more effective, which queries were more effective, right? And then watching it basically get better results in much shorter period of time every time you run it has been a game changer for me, because even though I'm a fairly seasoned threat hunter, incident responder, and security operations practitioner, I can't move that fast, right? I just simply can't, but I can provide feedback to this agent team as it's working. And that to me is worth its weight in gold, to sit there and just train, because every investigation I run now, I need to provide fewer inputs because of the past inputs it's already accounted for. And so those are two workflows that are a daily impact for me, that are, again, 5 years ago would have been nearly impossible to achieve.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Josh, I know you guys have been working with it quite a bit. What kind of things have you seen it able to do that it wasn't able to do 18 months ago?
I think I'm going to be a little contrarian. I've been doing sort of machine learning based threat detection for 25 years. To me, this is a pretty significant iteration on that. But I kind of want to back up a little bit and talk, like Eric sort of mentioned, that how do we define AI? And like Carl Sagan said, in order to bake an apple pie, you have to first invent the universe. I won't invent the universe, but I will say that I haven't seen a definition of AI such that an LLM qualifies, and yet supervised machine learning or other methods do not. So I want to include non-LLM based things in my definition, at least for the purposes of this discussion. And I really don't want to have a big argument about that. I just want to use it as a way to talk a little bit further. And then the next thing I want to say is we've had agentic systems, if you will, in security taking automatic steps, full life cycle steps since at least 2017. And I'm going to give you an example. In Defender, somewhere around 2017, I might be a little bit off on my timing, they started deploying deep learning models for the detection of malware. Then there is a decision step, so that the deep learning model will not only detect, but also quantify the confidence that the algorithm has in that detection. So there's a number, 75%, 92%. Then there's a decision-making algorithm that says, at this level, what do we do next? And then that is sent to remediation actions like shutting down processes, disabling accounts, etc. If you're willing to go along with all the things I just said, then I would say that that's an agentic system that's been taking active remediations, full flow from initial sensing of the binary all the way through remediation since about 2017. In Alpha Levels work, we are not going that end-to-end flow yet with fully automated systems. We are getting rid of a ton of noise for our human analysts so they can make more efficient decisions, but we're not yet trusting, I guess I'll say that the precision and recall of threat detection itself is several orders of magnitude worse than it needs to be in order to take active remediation steps without pissing off everybody in the enterprise. And the minute, your algorithm shuts down the CEO's account, your AI is done. Okay. You're not doing it anymore. So I think we need to be improving the precision, mostly precision, false positives, by several orders of magnitude before we start taking these end-to-end remediation steps. there's my more than 2 cents, perhaps.
Max, I want to go to you next because I know you have a slightly different take as far as assistive AI and how it's becoming operational AI. I know the detection space is its own sort of special animal, but we're talking more about operationalizing AI.
Yeah, and like honestly, I think it kind of dovetails great from what Joshua was talking about, right? There is certainly the distinction between I'm gonna I don't know, I'm gonna call it I think we need words, right, to associate words with these different things, and that's part of the challenge. So let's call LLM the LLM stuff, and then AI the old only for this part maybe. But the idea, the way I think about this is that I think the AI part of this, I think of like the assembly line, right? You're able to, with a lot of crafting, put a very specific pipeline together that achieves magic. And I think we've achieved that for a while. For me as a consumer, I'd put it, I remember the moment where like I hit that was with, I think it was like Google Photos that started tagging, labeling the pictures you had in there. And all of a sudden you could say, like, I'm looking for a gray cat and, find it in the pictures. And like, that's a very narrow pipeline. And I think that is how you get production, stuff going through. Not however, but, the way I think about the LLMs is obviously different because I think you're totally right on the recall precision not being there for having that same kind of pipeline, hardcore on all detections, for example, coming in. However, I think about this a little bit like the same distinction between cryptography and security. I think it's easy sometimes for people that get into security at the beginning to like see cryptography as like almost weirdly equivalent to security. And it's like, well, it's encrypted, so it's safe. It's like, no, one is very narrow, very machine efficient, extremely critical. But the reality is that there's a ton of gray area around this that is kind of equally important. And so the LLMs in my mind and the operationalization comes there first, where the precision, the recall, the fuzzy lines become a lot more acceptable, right? So when I think of like the first things, the first places where we bring in the LLMs to operationalize things, it's things like configuration and onboarding and research. And then, I think we're kind of building up that stack a little bit. Like I like the way that Eric was putting it, because that's also how I think about it. We're building up that training corpus for the LLMs of English. The models are getting better at the same time. And so I think we're making our way to a place where, we can have such, high precision, high recall that we can really use it as a workhorse for reliable, do this thing all the time. But I think it's going to be the last part. And, it's a lot less sexy to be talking about like, hey, I want to onboard this weird data source from this one vendor. But it's also a huge part of what the reality is of like security teams today in a SOC, for example. So I think that's kind of where those two things get bridged together.
Daniel, I'm curious to hear your take, the kind of scale and breadth that you look at things with eyes at Google. How does this land with you?
It lands in like an in between for me because I may look younger, but I'm a graybeard. So I agree with Joshua. Like a lot of there's been traditional ML before that did behavioral analytics and things like that. But what we're seeing with the LLMs coming in is the ability to use correlation on a vast scale, much greater, because then it ties reasoning into the graph of your infrastructure. So it used to be you can see an event in this one particular log, it might link to two other logs, and then you need a really highly skilled person to come in and then build the rest of the correlation on how it links out to other data points. So you can find where the original user was and how that tied to, a permission 5 systems away. And that's where we're seeing the LLMs to be able to do a level of reasoning to make those connections for you. So rather than searching for the needle in the haystack, the needle's starting to kind of bubble up to the top of the haystack. And the LLMs are making that happen a lot quicker. So as the confidence builds them and their reasoning capabilities improve and the ability to ground it on good behavior from previous examples and things like that, you'll see that shrink the amount of time and that like the amount of noise toil that you have to go through in order to find those, and then get that story that can craft it out for you. So that person have to spend 3 hours saying, well, they logged in here and then I found it twittered this and it tinked that. Like the LM will be like, this is the path that went all the way through. So you can see from the start to the finish where that event occurred and why that occurred in an explainable story.
And I'm sure, and maybe I'm making some assumptions, but I'm sure Google does tons of benchmarking and stuff like that. Is this an exponential curve we're seeing, the improvement in efficiency and performance?
Yeah, we are ourselves internally on it because of that, being able to tame that noise. Like the volume of data that we get is huge. So anything that can start to get better correlation points and the association between those correlation points, it gives us, a logarithmic scale that's going up on, or exponential scale that is going up on, that we can improve on that. So.
Awesome. Chris, you've been very quiet, and I know you work with a lot of early stage companies. I'm really curious to hear what you're sort of seeing on the ground and what your take on this is.
I like what everyone's saying so far. Joshua, you kind of captured my heart when it comes to we've been using the word AI and security for a long time since we've deployed any sort of data science in production, right? Machine learning algorithms. We used to call that AI. But it was a little before its time. People didn't buy it. Now we have LLMs and everyone's like, holy crap. So Max, I agree with you. I think we should talk about LLMs, and then, I mean, almost anything data science, I think we call AI. A comment about LLMs, and then I want to answer your direct question about the specific workflow that I think has been the most useful from what I've seen. I think maybe Eric, you brought it up, but just like LLMs are trained. I mean, they're generalists, right? They're really, really good generalists. Like they're very, very broad, pretty deep. I mean, until we actually train a threat hunting model, we're just using like we'll call it a native English speaker and trying to like cram in some structure around them to have them do a thing for us. I fundamentally view LLMs as like the great technology innovation that they're bringing to us is ability to reason at scale, like expertise level of reasoning. I don't view them as workflow masters. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I'll probably get on a soapbox at some point over this time here about that. But okay, so which workflow I think has been the most useful? Out of the box, I think just being able to upload a PDF, an intelligence report, and having it summarize and pull out IOCs. I don't love IOCs, but having it pull out IOCs and then maybe doing something with it, running like a query against your SIEM or something, that's pretty useful, I think. You're having people who feel like they're hunting and doing some high-end stuff, and we know how easily that breaks and how unscalable that probably actually is. But I would say that's probably the number one use case area people talk about where they might get past that inflection point of what is AI to, ooh, I think I could actually use this.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so one of the big distinctions I hear a lot is this idea about AI as an operator versus AI as an assistant. How is this changing the way we all need to start thinking about security operations? Max, I know we've talked about this a lot. Can you maybe help us frame this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's I think there's going to be a lot of this where it's kind of a summary of the previous thing that we talked about, kind of put together, right? But I think the big distinction that we're seeing is between those two things is the evolution of LLMs in the past 2 years. We started with ChatGPT, right? Like super quick summary, right? We started with ChatGPT, and then, well, don't nitpick this. I am sure there were various versions that existed before. I mean, at the consumer level, like at the chat level, and fundamentally those models are text in, text out, right? English. And so we started by just being able to interrogate that model. And over time, slowly, we added this concept of tools. And then, as we refined this, we eventually got to the concept of MCP, where we started to, again, expand a little bit the horizon of the tools that were possible to use. And there's a race between two things that happened in there, which is the race between the tooling itself. So this concept of tool calls, and a race between the quality of reasoning of the models. and we hit the tool calls before we hit the sweet spot for the reasoning. So as this was happening, it meant that our model was able to call a tool that is get alert, right? Like the very simple tools, it's an API and go and get this and kind of like summarize this. Perfect use case. So that's the assistant level, right? Get me a little bit of data, dump it into context, and then summarize it or tell me a little bit about it. What happened is, in my mind, I would say in the last 6 months, I mean, maybe you could expand it to maybe a year, is the models have gotten so good that they've caught up with the ability to do tool calls. And now, if you try to put yourself in the middle of that loop, if you try to, to inject yourself in the middle of that loop to say, these are the tools that you should call in this order to accomplish this thing, you're losing 50% of the value of the new models, because the new models are able to get you to the outcome, right? So you're able to describe an outcome. You're able to describe a set of tools. We've moved past MCP, which I'm sure is a topic where we might touch at some point on, but like moving past MCP, and we get to this point where now it's really able to reason first about the tools that it needs and to maintain that thread over a long period of time and do the type of investigation that Eric was talking about. And so that's the operator level, right? We're no longer just saying like, hey, get this piece of data and summarize it and then tell it to me, which is fine, but now we're actually able to say, you are an operator of this machinery. This is the outcome that I'm looking for. Here's a corpus of, training data, right? English training, to help you along, but figure out your path through this. So I think to me, that's the distinction here.
Josh, I'm interested to ask you, I know, let's make the distinction between ML and LLMs. And I know the core of your work's very deterministic and built on MLs. Have you been using LLMs from recommending things to doing things in any of the work you're doing at alpha level?
No, honestly, we view LLMs as the natural language part of a flow. I think, like Chris said, decision making or orchestration of workflows, we use other methods, graph methods and decision science methods. So the way I look at large language models in particular is tasks that involve natural language processing. There are a lot of those, from summarization. That's a pretty obvious one, is just produce a natural language report or a chat interface or something like that. There's more subtle things that are having massive impact for us, like normalization of data without having to build a bunch of regex and maintain a bunch of regex. That's a fundamental game changer for not wasting time in developing new methods and so forth. I could go on the applications of using large language models in a workflow, but where I am stopping is kind of where Chris is stopping, in that we don't use it to orchestrate or decide on where to send, the inference down a pipeline of algorithms. Yeah, I feel like I've always been a sort of right tool for the job, and the tools here are very deep and very broad. There's 200 years of statistics and machine learning research to draw from. So I think I would offer caution in assuming that large language models are the only and best way to do this. I have alternatives that I can suggest. Graph methods for correlation are a core research for me, and I've been publishing a long time. They're really good, and they're really cheap, and they are understandable from a development perspective and controllable and things. So there's a lot of, I think I'm offering to this group and the larger audience, don't throw out all the other stuff we know how to do, and have very sophisticated decision making and try a lot of things and measure what's working well, both from a algorithmic performance perspective at scale with lots of examples, but also cost. And, we haven't talked a lot about cost, but a lot of times I'm seeing vendors come with LLM solutions that are far more expensive than something we could do more simply. So,
yeah, and that's interesting because I think that comes down to, the narrow versus broad approach to a problem. If we can really narrow the problem down, we can build a tailored solution that can solve it efficiently and at scale. And I think one of the things that the LLMs bring is, maybe not a deterministic outcome, but like a broad set of capabilities that bring efficiency operationally. Eric, you work with a lot of junior analysts. Are you seeing this improvement in operational efficiency inside the organization?
Okay, so yes. However, so Joshua there is sharing some really phenomenal insights, and it actually it's there's a direct correlation between sort of the message behind kind of what he's saying to what I'm observing with the impact that AI is having on sort of junior level, entry level, up and coming sort of practitioners. And I want to extrapolate a little bit of what I gathered from Joshua and his really brilliant insights into kind of, the tendency for the mass wave of AI LLM adoption is to kind of completely throw out the long history of traditional machine learning. And it dawned on me, the humble side of me said, man, he's 100% right. It's like a bunch of folks that just learned how to swing a sledgehammer, but never thought maybe I should first practice with the precision tools. But that is the exact same risk I see, Chris, introducing these types of systems into junior workforce. Because, you put these tools in untrained hands. Where's the feedback loop now? Garbage in, garbage out, right? And who's supervising the model that's still learning when the person using the model is also still learning, right? And so I think it can be a huge plus, but there are caveats. And again, there's a lot of parallels to what Joshua just said, right? An LLM is not the end all be all solution to all of these problems. And so the caveat, I think, to AI effectively augmenting junior workforce is there's some major assumptions there that the model, the workflows, the checkpoints, the hooks, the tools, all that stuff has to be expertly designed, right? And continually tuned and tweaked and maintained by folks that really do know what's going on and really do know how these things work before you just set it loose on junior people and think that good things are going to come out of it, because actually, to the contrary, very, very bad things can come out of it, right? So it's I hate to give such a opaque answer, but I think it's very true that it can be equal parts good as it can be bad, and there's a lot of determining factors that go into that.
With great power comes great responsibility.
I say that like 3 times a week, Chris. Yes, yes.
Yeah, my mental model. Oh, go for it, Dan.
I was gonna say that whole it reminds me of that incident that was when vibe coding was starting to be the soup du jour, right? And then one guy's going on Twitter, it's like, I just vibe coded my whole app. It's got the database and everything, and it's up and running. Programmers are over, blah blah blah. And then the next post was like, why are you all attacking my database? And then everyone was like, okay, my database is down. I learned my lesson. It's not just. So it's like the tool needs to get a little further along in there.
Exactly. For me, my mental model here is, it's nothing new, right? But it's, if what I need is to produce bicycles and I need to produce 100 bicycles a day, I'm going to spend a year building my assembly chain, tweak all the pieces in my assembly chain so I can start producing those bicycles. To me, that's ML. That's like, when you say like we have like 100 years of like thinking about this, and yes, I think we can sit down and spend, 6 months a year to build an extremely efficient, extremely powerful like pipeline for this. And then the way I see the LLMs in this is like, if my bike breaks, I don't want to go to a factory and try to get them to build an assembly line for me. I just kind of want like the dude across the street who's got a bunch of tools in his toolbox. And yeah, every now and then he's going to strip a nut and like, that's fine. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be good enough. So I think that's when I think like alert triage, high flow, high repeatability, like I want ML all the way. Summarizing stuff, to your point, is like, yeah, that's a little bit more loosey-goosey.
I agree a lot with Max and also still with Joshua, because the way I kind of see, Max, your analogy, because I'm also a big believer in this as well for the same reason. But where I think that Joshua's concepts, and I'm really taking a lot away from you, Joshua, I appreciate your insights, is that like, well, yeah, I don't want a whole factory line just for assembling bicycles. But there's a couple of parts on that bicycle that are never changing. That are critical, that are very important. So maybe the chain. Okay, I'll let the chain. I'll have a chain producing factory. But all the other parts of my bicycle are changing all the time as I upgrade and downgrade. And this new handlebars comes out. These new tires come out. I want some of those things to be less fixed and to have more flexibility. But maybe there's a few components that I do not want that non-deterministic aspect to. And so, but yeah, I'm just agreeing with both of you on that.
Yeah, and I think I'm agreeing with Max too. We're not actually disagreeing. I like the analogy of the bike. And okay, I've got a production line that builds bikes, and that better be efficient and effective and make good bikes. Then you got the user who wants to modify their bike, and they need the democratization of the factory, if you will. They're not a bike expert, and they don't know the gear ratios and all of that. So they want to call somebody and say, hey man, I just want to move faster because I'm too slow. I want my gears bigger. I don't know. I'm not really a bike guy, but you know what I mean? So and a large language model democratizes, access to compute. It's actually what computer scientists have been doing since the beginning of time, is make it easier to use hardware and data to do stuff, make a new bike or things. So I think that LLMs are democratizing access to security knowledge and findings. One of the challenges is it's also democratizing attacks. So maybe that's a different topic, but yeah.
I don't think it's a different topic.
In rounding out this, there was a piece where we had assistant versus operator, and like for our side, the assistant is that's like the chatbot or the little summary tile on the side, and we see operator as when you're giving that robot agency. And so I get flack from the MCP guys, but I always make the API guys laugh because MCP is lazy APIs, right? It's, no longer really need to fully learn all the semantics and write it the right way. And so what I see coming out of some of the LLM side as it attaches to all these different tools, which may be a more specific ML, it might be something else, is it starts to be able to, you can feed it the data of behaviors, or you can also train it on the data of those behaviors. And then you can give it the agency when it sees certain things that way you don't need to be as bespoke about how you're developing your system that interfaces with those different pieces. And it can kind of figure out a little bit. It may not always be right. And that's why it still needs to be monitored, but it simplifies that, being able to interconnect those different systems and then have a behavior activate on it.
I'd like to just build on that just slightly, because the way I see it is, we all, when the LLM, boom happened, it was an assistant. It was an assistant before it was anything else, really, at least to consumers, to the masses. And then when the agentic sort of capabilities started to emerge, what very quickly became evident to me, at least, is that this is one of those scenarios where the sum is greater than the parts, because, the assistant assumes that it's a two-party conversation. It's the user and the assistant. Well, what if the user doesn't really know how to have this conversation, right? What if the user is injecting too much bias into the conversation? The effectiveness of the assistant becomes kind of variable, right? And so what I find is, at least in my experience, is when I couple the assistant aspect of the LLM with the agentic, operator capabilities, suddenly removing myself sometimes from that loop makes it more effective on both sides, right? Because I'm not injecting my wetware, nonsense, like it's just, and of course it's not always going to emerge with perfect results, but it's actually quite impressive whenever it's speaking with itself effectively in different capacities.
If you have good success criteria, you can build a loop where it might make a bunch of mistakes along the way, but it's going to eventually get to the right answer. Chris, you've been quiet again. I know as someone who's advising security companies on strategy, how do you see this?
So like the operator term, I think I'm learning what we mean by it here. I think it's more like the end-to-end orchestrating or quarterbacking an entire end-to-end life cycle. I think is what I mean by it. I think LLM's great assistance, like that was the first use case of it, really, right? I mean, it makes sense. I think there's utility to that. I think there's utility to it being an orchestrator of an entire end-to-end life cycle of a workflow or whatever. I honestly think the reason we're even having this panel is because we as an industry are terrible at understanding what it actually takes to analyze something. Like I think we spend close to zero time on analytical tradecraft, other than going to outsource training and then coming back and not knowing how to use it internally. Intelligence community has actually spent time studying this. There's papers out there about intelligence tradecraft. To me, it's the exact same analytical type of components or mechanics to it. And since we can't actually articulate it well as an industry, we never actually worked on it, we want to structure everything to be a deterministic problem. And so we take analysis of signals in the SOC and we try to structure it into workflows. And in my mind, as soon as you can structure the analysis, just automate it. So if you have humans looking at SOP to structure their work, in my mind, those humans are doing the wrong work, in my opinion. So I think LLMs today, as it sits, can be really, really good at scaling non-deterministic problem solving. And that's really hard for us to think about. Like, how do you control it? How do we know? How can you guarantee it's going to have the same answer? Like, well, we don't have that. We don't have that level of control or measure today. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And so and when Eric was talking, it made me think about this comment here. And that is like the user of an LLM the LLM is only as useful as like that user plus one, right? So if you give it to a tier one analyst and the LLM does a thing for you and it looks like magic, and the tier one analyst is like, cool, I love it, go for it. But the tier two analysts, they're going to call it BS. No, that was wrong. That's just absolutely fundamentally wrong. You know what I mean? So it's like it just goes to your level of knowledge until you can stop grading the output. So I still think it as an expertise machine. I think it can scale expertise, and it's ready to fool what level of expertise you're at, no matter where you're at. You know what I mean? So I think trying to like programmatically deploy LLMs into a SOC, all it's doing is it's amplifying our problems today. I really don't think it's solving anything.
This is really interesting. I feel like I particularly like this concept of like you say, look, we do training on running analysis and like the tradecraft, but it's not. There's no formalization. I mean, security formalization is as old as security, but also very, very much in its infancy, right? I think there's a couple of standards, I would say, like Sigma is kind of like the first one that comes to mind, and Yara, where we're defining that, but nothing for tradecraft. Mm-hmm. There's MITRE at a high level, right? High level conceptual, but there's nothing. I feel like there's no artifact that people can point to that is the standard of tradecraft. At the same time, I'm like, maybe a hot take, but I'm wondering, are these LLMs coming into the SOC going to be the catalyst for us to create those? Because when I think about a lot of the stuff Eric is doing, right, it's putting together, I think about it as putting together a lot of tradecraft, and not all of it, but I suspect that a lot of it could be given to a human analyst for them to read and learn how to do better tradecraft. So like, I'm wondering if like we're going to weirdly skip a step into this by, yes, producing this tradecraft, but not directly for humans, initially for LLMs, but we might all benefit from that after. I don't know. It just
it's an interesting take. Like, I think that's where I want to be. Like, I want to believe that this could be a catalyst. I mean, any of these things could be a catalyst, right? But I think if you don't own your strategy for security operations, and you're continually looking to buy solutions, you're continually looking to outsource part of the problem solving, then I don't see where there'd be a natural catalyst to cause you to do something differently, to actually like break apart how you do workflow, how do you build your team, how do you build an organization, how do you build your strategy, how do you build the metrics to grade whether you're being successful or not. And so like I just don't. There's been so many inputs into our industry that could catalyze that level of thinking. I don't know if LLMs will be different. They're my cynical opinion.
I have a similar cynical opinion, but I'll say that there has been a catalyst for my profession, which is sort of data science applied to threat detection in particular. It's a very sort of narrow part of security. I've been fighting this, trust from the industry on inferential methods, things beyond a rule, for 20 years. When, in 2008 or something, I started trying to get people to buy into UEBA, what became UEBA, but we were doing in the government sort of as anomaly detection and other things. And, CISOs were very skeptical, and anything that wasn't a rule that they could read and understand was rejected. And I had a hard time. I didn't know my chosen profession, whether my chosen profession would actually get adopted by security before I was dead. What LLMs have done is open the aperture and appetite for inferential methods from data.
Yes.
Right. Whether they're an LLM or anything else, people are starting to say yes. And I think we have to, because I've been anticipating, I think all of us have been anticipating that attacks that go beyond initial penetration, script kiddie, get into one endpoint, that as soon as you go to lateral movement, the exploration to find the right data to steal or encrypt or whatever, a multi-hop attack, that to date, most of that has been done with human decision making and the attacker's side. And even different teams that that are responsible for different parts of the attack itself, initial penetration followed by lateral. There are different teams that are deployed, but that's human speed attacks. I think all of us are anticipating that a lot of these attack behaviors can be encoded into models of some kind, and just autonomous decision making on the part of the attack code is coming. If we are using humans to interdict, we're lost. We've lost the game. They've already, in 3 milliseconds, encrypted the data for a ransomware attack. So we have to get there. And we have to deploy inferential methods in defense. And I'm just sort of grateful that the CISOs are starting to see that, machine learning is not only, well, it can be used here. It's necessary. We have to, or we're lost as an industry. So
can I disagree with Josh while agreeing with him, or disagree with him in order to agree with him? I think everything you just said, I agree with, but I think it leads to why you must have a human in the loop and why it scales. I think what LLMs are actually catalyzing is it's like I said before, it's scaling inefficiency. I think we want to do more of what we're doing, and I think what we're doing isn't working. And looking at LLMs, like this actually is technology we need as an industry, because we need help thinking about the problem. We need to be solving better problems, not solving the same problem the same way, but in a scaled fashion. And as the adversaries, let's just presume the attacks are going to increase at a greater than human level, right? We'll just presume that. What does that mean for us? So I think the reaction is that we need to also deploy like a more technologically heavy solution. Yes, maybe, but I don't know why we can't have a world where we use LLMs. Let's say we break apart analytical tradecraft. This is how you analyze disparate pieces of data to come to a conclusion. Let a human actually be the one to make the decision. And then now you have this agentic analytical ecosystem looking at way more data, way more dynamic piece of data, just in time, dynamism. And then a human can actually scale, because now whenever they make a decision, they're making a decision on 50% of everything that company sees. Versus today, you have 150 humans making a decision on a sliver of a fraction of something that actually doesn't really matter. So I really think we have the technology today with LLMs to help us think about the problem better. What I don't want to see happen in the industry is we scale what we have today. That is not the answer. It can't be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. I always think of the LLM as like my mech suit. I don't know if anybody here played Titanfall, but I just want to pivot over to like the LLM AI meets real world fuzziness. So for like service providers, MSSPs, and MDRs, which are running complex multi-tenant environments and have super thin margins. Eric, you train defenders and work with service providers constantly. Where are we seeing the biggest operational impact of adopting AI deeply, beyond alert triage? Are you seeing that impact operations?
Oh, without a doubt, every single day. And that's actually probably what I spend about 80% of my time focusing on right now, because I am of the belief that by codifying the knowledge of the best practitioners that you have on your team into these agentic workflows and capabilities, not only are there massive efficiency gains to be realized, but there's effectiveness gains to be realized. And what I mean by that is, there's no team in the world that every single person on that team is the rock star, the one that always finds the bad guy, that never gets it wrong, that doesn't make false positive determinations. And, so teams are a spectrum, but that's the whole promise of saying, hey, let's compile all of our best thinking, right, into agent instructions and into, checkpoints, into QA review processes. Once and of course, this is a never ending sort of iteration, but like once you get to that point and you realize, crap, I think we've given it everything that we know. And then you realize as you send things through it now, it's damn near perfect every time it pops on the other side. And now you realize that every triage, every investigation, even every IR workflow is always, without fail, accounting for all of the best practices. And this is not a new concept, right? This goes back to, the promise of SOAR was kind of the same thing, right? Is, hey, your analysts are already doing these manual workflows over and over and over again. Codify them, automate them. Okay, got it. But the SOAR the original SOAR did not have this, non-deterministic, pro and con, right? To say, well, hold on a minute, I'm not sure this is what it looks like, and let me look at it this way and that way. Some artificial reasoning, right? And so it's a game changer for a number of reasons, Chris. Not only the efficiency, but like I said, when done right, which to the point of everyone on this call is rare, okay? But when done right, the outcomes are game changing, right? The quality of investigative work, the depth of investigative work is mind boggling, and it's no longer subject to who was on the keyboard doing it, right? I don't have to worry, when the big incident comes in, but the junior analyst was the one that was on call, are they going to mess it up? It's like, no, because they're using the thing that was trained by all of us. So it's going to be at least as good as our combined best thinking, and not held to the level of the person at the keyboard who, like the rest of us, makes mistakes and is hard set at their training level, right? So, that's just one of many things that we've realized, Chris, in the efficiencies and capabilities that are here. But I do want to just couple one other thing that I don't think we've talked about enough here. We've talked about LLM, but I think there's a minor distinction to the LLM coding agent type of applications, because now it's not just generating language, but if I can generate code or even just simply interacting with command lines of, my operating system, the number of things that enables, that opens up is kind of cool, because to piggyback on the whole, attackers are getting faster. Yes. And case in point, on Christmas Eve, a security researcher at Elastic dropped a POC for MongoDB, an exploit POC that shook the world, right? Thank you. Merry Christmas, right? Now, I didn't see it until the 26th, but I saw it on Blue Sky and I was like, oh man, that sucks. Because, like everyone else, I enjoyed my Christmas day. But on the 26th, I looked at it and said, oh, that sucks. Well, let me go look to see if there's any defensive guidance, any detection content. None. Because it was dropped Christmas Eve, right? So I sit down, fire up my coding agent, spin up a dozen Docker containers and go to town, generating that attack data, analyzing it with the assistance of the LLM, the coding agent, and all that. And I was the first to publish defensive guidance and detection content for that. But let me tell you something. I would not have done it had I not had the force multiplier, the gains that I had with those tools. Because again, it's the day after Christmas and I'm not working, but I know I can get this done in record time, actually, if I utilize these tools. And so that's the kind of thing, right? We can do more, we can do it faster, but there's obviously infinite caveats and lots of different ways it can go wrong.
Daniel, I'm curious, Google, again, the scale that you guys operate at, are you seeing massive efficiencies in the way your security operations run?
Yeah, so in mentioning what Joshua touched upon earlier, kind of helping to automate that high volume, low context, cross telemetry management, right? So getting all those different data points and then not having to write integration patterns for each of them, figuring out the regex or what YAML I need over here or what JSON that one is. It's immensely improved that in the scale that it's every time I look, I'm just like, wow, I do not have to do integration, log integration, that kind of toil anymore. I can just kind of pull it all together. That's where we saw the hugest impact, because the volume of data that we get is immense. So we would need an army of people, and we usually had an army of people somewhere that originally would start to work on that. And then we had a couple, really good ninjas that would be like, this is my 23 line regex for you. And it go in and do that piece. So it eliminates needing that and helping you get to that other side faster. But that's where, and then touching upon what Eric said about how it helped him with Force Amplify working on that patch. We've also seen now at the same time, agentic attacks, where Josh was talking about the bad side of it, where an agentic attack would come in and it could rotate the credentials in a whole cloud environment in seconds, as soon as again, across the whole environment, right? So if you were a normal hacker, unless you already knew all those variables in that context, it would still take you a couple of minutes. The agent could come in and be like, query, bang, bang, it rotated all the credentials, done. I now own your cloud environment. So getting up to the point where you can detect that to get that defense, you have to scale your speed as well.
All right. So there's a growing field of AI SOC startups, each with unique approaches. And frankly, a lot of them are very cost prohibitive, as Joshua alluded to earlier. LLMs aren't super cheap. Max, without naming names, what's the architectural difference between platforms built for AI to operate versus platforms that bolted AI onto existing workflows? What breaks when you try and retrofit this?
I'm going to go back, I think, to something Daniel mentioned earlier. You kind of made the comment around calling APIs and MCP, and so I think what we've seen is three different categories there of ways of being built. So I think there's the one-off integrations, right? Which sadly I would say is where most of cybersecurity is, not in terms of organization, but in terms of volume of things that, the surface of things that could be done. Meaning the vast majority of security vendors and tools have some AI integration, but the surface area that they can do that is actually, exposed to AI is really small, right? So I think there's the one-off. There's the MCP integration, which there was a huge boom this year, which kind of enforced the same problems as the number one, meaning like this is like a problem we hit, right? We had like, I think our first version, we, had 170 tools, because we said, well, we want to expose all the things. And we were consuming something like 70,000 tokens. So that just does not work. And so the pure kind of MCP enforces in a way that you're going to expose very few tools. They're going to, you're going to be driven to wrap a bunch of things together in those tools, right? Instead of saying, hey, make a query and, very narrow query, you might say, hey, find me data across these 8 different data sets. Like you're going to try to wrap it up so that, yes, it does a lot, but it kind of does it as one tool. And I think you lose the agency from that. You remove agency from the model because now the MCP server is enforcing it. And then the last one is APIs. And so I think it's it's a throwback in a way to like the good old APIs. Turns out to like be a huge part, I think, of the answer here. Somebody I was talking to recently kind of put it well. They were kind of getting reminded of the whole software will eat the world kind of concept that there was many years ago. And I think in a weird way, we're going back to this because now the models are able to leverage all of those APIs very, very easily. So going back to I think the root of the question, I think the big difference is who is fundamentally built for APIs, right? So if you've built something that is a GUI first, it's going to be a long road. If you've built a bunch of APIs that later on roll up as a GUI, I think that's kind of like the better pattern here. So in my opinion, that's kind of like the progression. But what defines a specific tool that is the best for this? And I'll loop a little bit with what Eric mentioned earlier. Now there's the CLI tools, right? Which is a huge cheat code that just got introduced right in the middle of all of this, which is, it's like CLI turned out to be the best MCP in a weird way. So it's opened up a ton of things, but it kind of favors the same thing the way I think about it, right? There's security companies that have a CLI that allows you to get the list of detections, and that's it. Everything else you got to pay for to get access to a PDF that is behind paywalls, and is really hard to try to get access to. And then there's the opposite, which is there's the the hyperscalers are a great example, right? Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS can do 100% through all of their CLIs. Therefore, AIs have 100% coverage over those platforms, and that's amazing.
What I hope to see coming from it, and it's a term that makes me laugh every time I hear it now because I feel like it's been decades, and Joshua's probably been fighting this battle that whole time, was all about self-healing and autonomic, right? So with the ML stuff they've had before, because we've had that. I worked in banking before Google, and we had I've brought in stuff for oh, look, this can find behavioral anomalies, and we can turn things off. And they're like, well, who's going to approve turning it off? And it was you just always hit that hard stop. Nobody would let it go autonomic. And so as LLMs, I think, help loosen a little bit of the chain with non-determinism, that it's going to have a knock-on effect for things that do have some deterministic ML outputs as well, on acceptance on autonomic behaviors, that the 99% case is going to be okay versus it always has to be perfectly right. So I think that's going to, and when those platforms are tiered and tied for working and interfacing with AI as well, that'll smooth that out so that we can see that coming.
I can't wait. And that makes me very excited, Dan. We're in a risk business. You have to accept risk in security. One of the risks that the industry needs to accept is you're going to have a certain level of false positives in order to block the real attacks. And machine learning has a few more false positives than rules do. Well, this is a risk calculation. If you want to get through all of your evidence and get to the true positives, you better be willing to relax your rigor around, rule-based threat detection in order to get that added recall and protection that you need. So I think people are coming along with that. And I think the rise of LLM's popularity has helped us move towards that risk computation.
Yeah. Awesome. So
Hallelujah.
Go ahead.
I just said hallelujah.
It's been a long time. Right?
So I'm really cognizant of time. So I'm just going to try and close things off here. You guys can give me 1 or 2 sentences each. I just want to fast forward to late 2026 or 2027, sort of a prediction. What capability that sounds ambitious today will feel like table stakes by then? Eric, let's start with you. I know you're very keen on what's coming.
Oh, geez. I would have liked to have a couple minutes to maybe think on that one because I feel like the features and innovations are coming so quickly. I'm doing my best just to stay on top of what's happening right now, and I follow it closely. I use it every day, all day, and so it's almost difficult for me to try to predict that far out because of the speed that it's moving. I'm like, I don't know if I'm imaginative enough to guess where it's going to be at the end of 2026, right? Like, I know, Chris, you and I were talking earlier. I mean, and about and these are kind of silly in my opinion, but it's a thing, I guess, to someone is the browser, like Atlas and Comet and these browsers with AI built into them. I'm like, and I said, I tried it out. It wasn't that effective. It wasn't that impressive. And I didn't really have that many use cases for it, but I was like, I'm sure that's going to get a lot better. And then and once it does, that's when I think regular people start to be taking part in agentic workflows, because regular people are not messing with Claude code and doing, things like this. But when you give them an app they already use every single day and you say, hey, look, click this button, talk to the app, and it will do all the things. Now suddenly grandma's using it and, my parents are using it. So that's something I think, Chris, is LLMs and AI, as we refer to it, is still very much nerd territory. What I think is likely to happen this year is we're going to see it really start to permeate into the non-nerd world because there's a bajillion use cases and therefore money to be made. So usually follow the money, right? But I don't know. That's my unprompted, hadn't really considered it take.
Who wants the next one?
I'll jump in. So the big thing for me is where I hope to see it going, and I start to see it happen, and it ties into LLM strength being the natural language processing part of it, is that you're kind of moving from policy as code and needing to know the structure of those pieces of code and those policies to intent-based security, where you can just be keep this PII protected. And you pass that as what you want rather than learning the YAML string I need to pass to the system with those particular pieces in the definition. So getting to that point where you can have that conversation to define what you want to end up having as that policy is an intent-based security. And I think we're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but I think that's what will be big coming up over the next year.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow off of Eric and Daniel. Hopefully this year, but I think definitely by 2027, I think we're going to see something that it sounds ambitious now, but I think it's inevitable. And that is it's a natural language interface into your entire security operations. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean a true AI native SIM that comes out and actually does things differently and gives you humans a natural language interface, but in the back end is doing a whole lot more, data science and true data analytics, things that have to happen in batch, things that have to happen in correlation, things that need to happen in real time. I don't know why that doesn't exist yet, to be honest. I feel like we have we have the raw materials to build it today. Mm-hmm. So I suspect this year we're probably going to see maybe there's those working in stealth right now to do this, but I don't know why we don't have a true AI native. I mean, if we still consider security operations and we'll call the SIM as the core tech stack for it as being human operated, then I don't know why our industry is built around the flaws of the SIM instead of the SIM being built to work around human analytical thinking.
You guys said really great things. Now I'm the last guy, so I'm really a threat detection guy, right? So I don't really think about. I mean, I think about the rest of security, but for me, my comments are about threat detection in particular. I think we're going to see several orders of magnitude lower false positives in the next couple of years. That we're finally starting to use the right inferential methods to identify the garbage and noise and get rid of it, contextualize through context. Vendors can't ship detectors that work for everybody. In fact, they don't work for anybody. And the edge cases and context are what determine whether something is bad or good for a given enterprise. So that sort of dynamic context acquisition, and I think Chris mentioned sort of just-in-time inference, given a piece of evidence, go figure out if it's bad or good, is accelerating quite a lot with LLM of AI SOC, sort of alert triage. That's also what Alpha Level does, little pitch, without LLMs. And I think that, so what does that do to the rest of the pipeline? Well, with a lot less noise, the human analysts are more empowered. They're missing less. They're getting through all of the stuff they need to get through. And then the automated systems to take actions as a result of the initial findings from, you know, is this something you need to worry about or not, are going to also accelerate as a result of better signal coming into the rest of that pipeline. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. It's about time we stop showing analysts the same stupid alert every day of the week. It's about time we started clean up our mess.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I will start by saying I really hope ML comes through much more pervasively in the SOC, because I completely agree with you. Like it's incredible that we're not already there. So I appreciate you fighting the good fight. In terms of the LLM side of things, I think the frontier labs have reached escape velocity compared to cybersecurity in terms of the quality of the models. Meaning, what I don't think is going to happen is that there's going to be cybersecurity companies training really good models on cybersecurity stuff. I think the way we're going to get better, access in cybersecurity is from the general models. The amount of funds that are invested from those frontier labs is just insane. So they're going to keep getting way, way, way better. I think they're getting a lot more pull on better models than cheaper, smaller models. So I don't think we're going to see the level of, hey, I have models on everything running all the time and in an efficient way. I think we're more likely going to see more complex models that keep getting better at model recursion, right? I'm thinking of subagents that we're seeing, the value we're getting from the model itself, understanding subagents and being able to talk to close-knit other submodels to accomplish greater tasks. Like, that would be my bet, is that this ends up exploding even more, which explodes the cost, but that's a whole different thing. And then we end up with just like mind-blowing results. Now, whether we can leverage those results realistically in the SOC is a different thing, but that's my prediction.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for taking part in this conversation today. I know we went a little bit long, but I feel like we could just sit on this call for 6 hours and still have things to talk about. So really appreciate you taking the time. I'm about to hand this off to Ken Weston, who is going to demonstrate how LimaCharlie is operationalizing this in practice. A huge thank you to our panelists, Maxime, Eric, Josh, Daniel, and Chris, for this insightful discussion. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today.